Looks like a nice day, JP.
You're muted, John.
Yeah, it is a nice day today. It's it cooled off it's 15 degrees cooler today than yesterday.
Whew.
And it's really windy, which is why I'm wearing a jacket.
Wow. It's a big turn.
Yeah. But
Good. Sounds like you had forest fire worries the other day. Sounds like you stepped past them.
No, it's still super dry and it's windier, which is bad.
Okay.
And it's going to get hot again in the next couple days. So, yeah, they'll probably kick us out of the woods here pretty soon, would be my guess.
Wow.
But
have you guys, over the history of the farm, have you ever had any large swaths of the farm get burned?
No, we haven't had the farm get burned, but we've had a fire come up right to the edge of the farm. And that was back in let's see, mid 80s, I think. Yeah, a fire came up right to the edge of the farm, and there's a field right there, and so it sort of slowed down and went onto the field, dropped out of the trees. It was a crown fire in our neighbor's property. Dropped onto the field and then sort of slowed down a little bit and was coming towards our forest, basically. And then the wind just changed directions pretty suddenly and just blew it. It literally just blew it along the edge of our farm. So
remarkable.
It was a theophany.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. Pretty crazy story.
Yeah.
I listened to I think it was a daily episode recently, and in some cases up to like 80% of the firefighting force out in California are inmate fire brigades. And yeah, that's a whole interesting dynamic.
I should say they get time off, or
I think they just get like a teeny bit more pay, and that they also get to stay in like a way nicer, like almost outdoor prison facility while they're firefighting, and then they get like a couple dollars a day for the work they do out there instead of like $1 a day compared to what they get paid for doing other jobs at the prison. Yeah, pretty insane. And the story was a personal story of she interviewed someone a while ago who was on it, and then they brought this story back because I think one of the people they interviewed ended up dying from while they were firefighting. So yeah, it's pretty.
Wow.
That's a conversation we ought to have in some depth sometime. When something good is written about it that we catch wind of. Let's read it. I mean, the whole incarceration.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to resist and not use any adjectives. Thing, incarceration thing.
Incarceration thing.
All right. So today was a day to return to this question of this three-lens matrix. I'm going to jump to it here. You guys have seen this before. This is, was it Monday? I think it was Monday that we...
I think Friday, because I missed it.
Yeah. Okay. That's right. That we hit sport and school. That's right. It was the end of a long day. JP, you were toast. It was that day. So we sprint hard for about 30 minutes. That was the theory. And just talked again about, tried to set up the short idea there is a lens is something like a group of experiences, insights. It's something like, I think it's fair to call it a model. I think a lens is always a model of some sort that that doesn't say everything about everything. It says something about something, a particular lens is, but it's big enough to do the work of a lens. It's big enough to transform the way you see things. I was suggesting that we're going to look at 3 of those and layer those on without suggesting that you have to get the pieces of them sequentially. You can at least visit the topics. You can visit the lenses and pick up the lenses and use them. I think relatively independently of one another. But together they have a lot of power, and individually they have some power. And the question is, what are those lenses made of? And I'm suggesting tonight that they're actually made of problem, resource, solution triplets, something like that. Do I know what I'm talking about here? I most certainly don't. Okay, so I'm trying to work my way through this, and this is the best I have at the moment. It seems to me that problem, resource, solution you sure triplets, sets are big enough to have a meaning, big enough to capture some insight. And that's the stuff, capturing some insight, at least in a preliminary way, is the stuff I'm suggesting that holds the chaos of information overload at bay. It's the stuff we use to find our way through the world and start to order it and put stuff in places and build structure. This is a negative anthropic process. We're cutting against disorder in some way. We're building some order against the disorder that stands. And a lens, then, I think, is something larger than these individual triplets of this is a problem, here's some resources that you can use, and this is a solution. But already you can sort of see some meaning and something. Maybe you wouldn't want to throw away a triplet like that. Here's a problem that's worth solving. Here's some resources for solving it, and here's what a solution would look like. Now that might contradict everything else you think, and so you have more work to do to see if you can hang on to that thing, right? And it's not enough said that these things don't stand in isolation of one another, I don't think, especially when you look at the resources. I think you'll see themes in resources that will start to, the same sort of resource will shed light in different areas, things like that. But I do think that there's a kind of sense, there's an organizational sense to, if you can call a thing a problem, there's already some kind of meaning, some kind of identification, some kind of circling and structure around something that looks like a problem. You're aware that it's related. Homelessness is related to drug abuse, is related to our economic system, and all kinds of different things. And you can see all those relationships, but at the same time, it makes sense to talk about the problem that people don't have homes to live in. And that you might say that's an independent, you can abstract and think about it for a while on its own. And you could imagine bringing in resources that start to what are they doing? Alleviate some of the negativity. There's kind of a negative vibe when you call something a problem. It suggests that this is not something we want, right? So if these resources enable us to transform this problem into something that looks more like a solution as you move forward, then that is something like a glimmer of hope. Is one way to think about it, and it's something you don't throw that away. You hang on to that, and it's got enough structure that you start to build with it. And I think if you cluster the resources that enable you to solve some set of problems, then now you're starting to look toward if those resources cluster in a place that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it transforms your perspective on these problems so that they seem now solvable. Now you're starting to look at what I mean by a lens. It's a little bit larger, but it's not everything. It's not the whole story. It's not the sum of everything that you think, the sum of all the interconnected problems, etc. It'd be nice to get there too, but boy, is that a big task, right? To come up with that a whole system of thought and practice that's coherent and that orders the whole world for you. That almost seems unreachable. So let's try building it a little bit at a time. There's the suggestion in calling these things lenses is that when you put them on, they transform how you see the world. And there's further a suggestion in the hierarchy of lenses that somehow your view needs to be transformed sometimes in order to see a next set of problems. It could be you have to become, or I have to become, a different kind of person to some extent. It could be that I need to gain experience looking at things from a certain point of view. It could be that I have to gain experience trying things from a certain point of view. I have to know what works. And maybe these are things which I would only try if I view the world this way. And maybe I need to see those attempts as worth making, and I need to make them and gain a kind of experience making them. And then that experience feeds back into this whole thing. And now I'm a different kind of person, not one who just understands that this is a theoretical possibility. This is an achievable result, right? And I know what it's like to be someone who looks at the world this way. And maybe that has to happen before other pieces, or put it this way, to the extent that happens or doesn't happen, it might change the way some other lens sits for us, the way it fits for us, its plausibility, its clarity. Does it actually add value, or is it just a confusing new set of possibilities? Or does it make the world look clearer? And did you need to see the world through the first lens and gain some experience with that world and be transformed in order for that clarity to come to light? MacIntyre's written his last book. If you want to dive into this hard, MacIntyre made this point in 3 rival versions of moral inquiry, but he runs through it in real detail in his Ethics and the Conflicts of Modernity, his most recent major work. Maybe that came out in 2016, if I remember roughly, that Ethics and the Conflicts of Modernity. Okay, so all I mean to say is this is my attempt to try to put into this information paradigm the sort of things that MacIntyre talks about in his work. Okay, that was a lot of speech, but setting up in a new way what it is we're about to try to do. What I propose we do is work through, this is just a sketch in this tab here of a bunch of problems, a bunch of resources, and a bunch of solutions. and they're in theory, they're layered around this idea that let's cluster one set of resources and call it a thing. And let's just live with that for a while and see what work that can do for us, including now, since our conversation tonight, or rather my monologue tonight so far, maybe there's an experience component in there, right? That this lens requires. And that would be a very interesting new category that would end up in a column on this thing. If there's kinds of experiences you need in order to take on this lens, in order to see through it well, or in order for it to sort of mature, the way my analogies with eye surgery here, the way you put it, you remove cataracts or you do LASIK surgery or something, right? And you start messing with lenses, and it takes the eye, the brain, etc., time to respond. Maybe that's the case in other ways as well, and maybe it doesn't all happen as fast as vision, which has got like 2/3 of our sensory input devoted to it. Right? I think anybody remember that it's an incredible flow rate. It's like 2 million bits per second or something like that.
Yeah,
of information.
2 gigabytes a second is what I've heard. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot. Okay, let's just look at the problems. You notice I put down problem numbers just for reference, in case we want to build something bigger. Eventually, it'd be nice just to make reference to these things, and you could look them up. Resource numbers. Here I'm suggesting, this is like what I just suggested, but it's not quite the same. I showed you that Friday. Rachel, I don't know if you've gone back and seen that episode, but at the very end, I ended up with a milestone map that we used in a different sort of context about making sense of CMS data from the CMS detector, where we built milestones and said, you got somewhere, you have a clue when you can do this, right? And that's what I mean by a milestone. And then sometimes, just like these resources have got numbers, these milestones sometimes have a little bit of reference text associated with them, because you want to be able to put a bumper sticker on it and say that thing, I don't want to have to spend 2 sentences describing what it is that you need to be able to do. I just want to refer to it with a little bit of text, and you saw that map using little tiny bits of text like that, like explain the big problems, right? Or get to know the detector, know your detector, 3 words. And that refers to a bunch of things that you ought to be able to do, and that would be laid out in a little bit more detail, but it's a very clear, it ought to be clear, it ought to be accessible, whether somebody's actually done that thing or not, including accessible to you. You ought to be able to tell whether you've done it, whether at least you've got reason to think you've done what that milestone asks. And then somebody else can come in and comment and say, yeah, you had reason, but here's how you could do it a little better, etc. Okay. So you ought to be able to state what the problem is. For example, these are 3 words, not a problem, right? So whatever it is, somewhere in this milestone would be to be able to describe what this problem is. The same thing is true to be able to describe the resources. So in the solution, presumably, the resources are appealed to solve the problem. And these, again, are just a couple of words thrown at it, which would have to be laid out in a little bit more detail. Presumably, that's what the milestone would not, the milestone wouldn't be that detail. The milestone would call for that detail. It would say, you get this if you can answer, if you can say this, right? Okay. And here I'm looking to track dependencies. So suppose it's the case that the resources you tap for one thing are actually themselves solutions for some other problem, something like that. Or you can't get the one off the ground without the other. then these things depend on one another. It would make sense to track these. And then I'm imagining here cases which illustrate the solutions to problems. So you could talk about this stuff in the abstract, sort of at the level of the model, but then you can talk about it at the level of deploying the model, right? Here's what it's like in the real world when that solution is brought to bear on these problems, or these resources are tapped, right? And brought to bear on this problem. This is what the solutions actually look like in the real world. And you could drop case numbers on those, and you could illustrate such cases. Am I thinking out a little far ahead? Maybe ridiculously so here.
No,
But
it makes sense.
I think it makes sense. The question is, can you do this? Can you go through a person's thought structure and map, in effect, the models that you have? Solutions to problems are really models. Why do I think that? I'm not sure I even know it, but I do think it. You have an account to offer about how the way the world works if you have a solution, right? That you have a problem. It certainly works this way with models in science, right? You got motion here. You got all kinds of stuff, and you've got a model for that motion. This is an inelastic collision, right? And we have a simple model for that, and we've got a conservation of momentum resource to tap, right? And some equations for that. And that whole thing is a certain kind of model, and it enables us to make sense of what the heck is going to happen over here, right? In this melee of motion. And the answer is, well, we know what's going to happen over here, kind of. We can make sense of this. And that is, in a certain sense, a solution to a problem of chaos. We just looked at it from the point of view of a bunch of stuff moving around that you don't know the rhyme or reason of. So models do work this way, and they may have a mathematical component, otherwise not. Anyway, I think that's what we're at here. And I think, moreover, that the folks I hear talk about the brain think the brain is wired this way. The brain is at work in a very large model, and it's got smaller models that it's weaving together inside the structure of the brain. So wouldn't it be interesting from the outside anyway to say, look, it looks like if we pay attention to all these parts that cohere, would we be mapping somebody's brain in a certain way is a good question. How would you ever know? You could actually find out these days. Maybe you know this, that we can watch, we can ask people questions, we can give them problems to think about, and we can literally watch the parts of their brain that light up while they're doing it. So it's still a very crude set of tools, but a lot of that work is done. There's an enormous amount of data increasingly. It's sort of like, this is the age of data. I'm no expert here, but from what I hear the experts say, this is an age of an embarrassment of data. We have an enormous amount of data. We just don't have a really good theories. This is exactly Jeff Hawkins' analysis of our situation a decade ago or more, right? When he puts together what he says is the first theoretical account, at least a first book that takes really seriously what's out there and says, there really is a theoretical account here. You see it in all these different researchers, but people are not sewing it together. So I'm going to sew it together for you. Here's what intelligence is and here's how it works. There still are a bunch of people in the field today working who think that account makes a lot of sense. This is why almost everybody ought to read On Intelligence by Jeff Hawkins. It's an important, it's accessible, and nobody's beat it quite. I don't know that for a fact, but I don't hear the people who would know it for a fact offer another candidate than this book. It still seems to be where the field is at, from the point of view of just doing what he's trying to do. Okay. So then this is a cool problem. Why the heck people aren't working on this problem, I don't know. But you'll notice this problem falls right out of a high information flow network of rich communities information processing model. It kind of falls right out of it. You're processing information, you're bringing it in, you're parallel processing with other people. You're trying to build a single coherent account of the way that the world works, of what to think, of what to do. Everything that you could think of is relevant to it. Could you put together some whole together, and then recognizing there are multiple wholes, find a way of comparing these things one to another, but without short circuiting the lens construction or the multiple lens construction, or in the end, this whole worldview construction, which people could come to take on together and work on together, not as every way to look at the world, but as one way of looking at the world, pushed farther than we typically push things now. Could you build that whole system and do it again and do it again, and then interact in a certain way which doesn't make gray out of all the colors, so to speak, right? Which too prematurely.
What do you mean by make gray out of all the colors?
You could imagine if you throw all your colors down and just mix them all together, you have one color and it's something like gray, right? But if you're going to paint, you do mix colors, but you keep them separate and you apply them methodically, right? In various ways, and the thing remains colored. It's not a melting pot, to use a cultural expression the United States is not.
Yeah, so you're talking about in a particular with a particular community with its lenses, they're not mixing. Does it work inside the community and also between different matrices? I mean, assuming each community has one of these, right? You're talking about in a particular community, right? You actually stay oriented, right? You apply, you have particular problems, you have particular resources, you have particular solutions.
That's right.
Right. For in a particular lens, and you can keep those straight in your community, right?
That's right.
And so that's keeping the colors not gray. But then also between communities, that was my question, is does that apply to between communities as well?
Right. So I'm really glad you're asking. And I find the color metaphor useful. But on the model that I was suggesting, one community is one color and another community is another color. Rose-colored glasses versus some other kind of glasses, right? If we're really going to work the visualization metaphor here. But the point is, in some social context, there would be such a thing as this is how we look at the world. There's a we there, right? And there's a how we look at the world and what we're up to in it. And you notice we don't have a lot of those, right? There really isn't very much. There aren't many contexts in which one could say that. You might say, well, we Americans tend to look at things in certain ways, or put it this way, one might have said that some time ago. Now it would be kind of ridiculous to say it. But I think historically it hasn't been ridiculous to say it, right? And there's still echoes of the fact that we used to say it. And there was an idea that people from other cultures came over in one big melting pot, but what we were making is not an intercultural gray. We were making Americans out of everybody, right? And we thought there was some substance and some content to that. And I get this is a contentious way of speaking these days, right? Because one way we brought people into alignment, for example, was taking the children of folks who didn't agree and indoctrinating them in the way that they did. That we certainly did that with Native Americans, for example, right? That's a really clear and incredibly overlooked set of cases. So, and of course, there are people who know that. And so there are people who would, these are people who would snarl and resist our current president's discussion of some sort of American patriotic education or something like that. They'd say, yeah, we know where that road leads, right? We've been down those roads before. And this is indoctrination, not education. They might say. So the point is, we've had this kind of conversation in American life in the past, but we don't aim very high. We don't try to live and produce one color very much, right? We don't try very much to come together and put together an account of the world where it become where there are meaningful contexts and people say, no, this is how we see the world. This is the way we look at things. You could imagine the Amish saying that, and they're the case that proves the point, right? That's a highly extreme, very unusual, you got to go shopping for it context. Okay. So yeah, to build these, what would milestones like this be for? Milestones like this would be a curriculum that enables you to grasp what the people who see the world in that whole have to offer by way of an introduction to their perspective on it. And you would have to sort of walk up these milestones. This would be an education in a certain way of looking at things. Not necessarily an education only for those who already have reason to think. I mean, you might raise your own children, you got to raise them somehow, right? You can imagine raising children with values, for example, or perspectives or learnings, et cetera, that you value. Hopefully not from this high information flow network of rich communities paradigm, not raising them without the ability to imaginatively enter into the way other people look at the world. In fact, a great ability to enter into that, as if it were necessary for making progress, as it is on this paradigm, on this high information flow network, rich communities paradigm. So it's interesting what education would look like, but it wouldn't only be hang with everybody and listen to everybody's opinions and come up with your own all the time, every place. That in that context, there is no we. Everybody's the center of their own trust network, right? You may pick up a few people you trust in this area or a few you trust in that, et cetera, but you are basically on your way as an individual. Heck, you'd think people would pair up just for fun sometimes, right? Hell, I don't know how to think about the world. Why don't we try going through it together? Right? That's not a thing. People don't do that. People don't go to college 2 by 2, right? Almost never. I mean, have you ever heard of it? I haven't. Even where they might well do it because they've been raised for a long time according to a certain structure. So 3 of the 4 of us, three of the 4 of us spent some time at the same school, spent a long time with a pretty rich curriculum, for example, where all kinds of people have that curriculum. And yet people don't go off to college together, typically. There are exceptions. Sometimes roommates will do it. Wouldn't it be good? Sometimes roommates will cluster together for a while, but almost never to pick the same majors and to go through and to put something together out of their education. And that is just not a thing. No one does that. So I'm suggesting then that the ladder we're trying to build is not a ladder that people typically climb. Usually people form their own ladders and scarcely pay any attention to them. That doesn't mean they don't have ladders. In fact, It doesn't mean that their brains aren't constantly putting together models of the world and trying desperately to interact, to have those models interact into more powerful explanatory wholes. Maybe that's what we're all struggling for. Maybe that's why we desperately reach out to other people. I'm speculating here. Maybe that's why we are so tribal, or part of why we are so tribal. Somehow in our DNA, we cannot do this by ourselves. Somehow we know that. We didn't come into being to do this by ourselves. I mean, look at language. We don't have private languages. We have a public language, for example, right? It suggests that's already an intense shaping of the world, right? Just the very language that we use. Okay. So thanks for listening to all of that. That's just a little bit more detailed immersion into a resource that I'm foreseeing and starting to put together. And what I'm suggesting we do this evening, not a ton of time for it, is to jump to a mind map and to map out, literally to map out the structure of a problem, a set of resources, and a solution, a triplet. What would it actually be to have such a thing? And then if you did such a thing, you could imagine, and a mind map would be a really nice way to do it. You could imagine linking nodes to nodes, core nodes to core nodes around problem types, or better around, maybe it's the resources that get tracked, or maybe you jump, maybe problems are interacting, maybe resources interacting, maybe solutions are interacting. Maybe those are different color threads, different types of edges that run through this space. That's a little bit more of an ambitious mind map, but literally what I'm talking about building is a mind map. Not a complete mind map. Just what would the mind map look like of a person who just imaginatively viewed the world through this first high information network of rich communities lens. Just to stop there. Not talking anything, there's no religion in there. There's no civic life in there, or there is some, there's no government in there, right? There's a lot of things you could go on to think about. Religion and politics, for example, to take two rather big areas, and all the things, and many of the things associated. But at some level, there's a lot in there nonetheless, right? What is a rich community? What's the algorithm by which information can be processed? By the way, what is information, right? What is it to process it? What is it to do it in parallel? What is it to do it in a tradition over time? What is cognitive versus non-cognitive contact with information in your choices? What are those mechanisms? What are those mechanisms that hold cultures together or hold communities together? All of that, there's a ton there. And you've hardly got off the ground, right? This is akin to just this infrastructure in the town. I'm suggesting that this high information flow network of rich communities is something analogous to the infrastructure in the town, where you get water, you get sewer, you get electricity, you get taxes. What else do you get? You get education for your kids. I don't know what else you get, but you get a few, right? That's part of the infrastructure. Every city has one. We have one too, right? And you can come and do all kinds of things here, and you go on from there, and there's tons more you can do. But the infrastructure is what it is. That's the basic services. Okay. So what I'm hoping is someone, Rachel, I don't know if you're sitting in front of a computer, you might be. I'm thinking JP's probably on a mobile device being outdoors, or maybe not. And
I've got one.
John, up to you. Everyone, we know what it's like to free for all in this space, and it actually works a little. We tried it once. I'm thinking we try it around this problem right here. I'm thinking that there is a problem we can identify, and that is there's just too damn much to know. That we are bombarded with information. We ought to, and Rachel, feel free to take notes in a mind map here. That's what I'm suggesting. And we kick it back and forth. It'd be better if I didn't just narrate this problem, but on the other hand, I identify these problems. So until it's sort of incumbent on me to say something about them, but then open to anybody to say more about them. But it does seem like just the one word, the internet, has transformed the amount of information at our fingertips. Right? We know what the whole world is doing now, or we can if we want to. In fact, it's hard not to, because you go anywhere, and it isn't only the internet, it's all of the actually it's that whole list of things that we mapped in information exchange the other day, right? All that information exchange, what did we call that stuff? Information exchange medium or platforms or something like that. I forget what word we use for those, but all of that stuff is where information pours in on us. And if you wanted to give an account, if you wanted to try to quantify it, it would be fun. I'm sure it's quantifiable. I mean, how many words does a person read, hear, see? That would be one thing that would be easily quantified. How does that compare to times past? I don't know. My guess is there's more. On the other hand, maybe people read books less. Good question. But what we actually take in is a teensiest little sample of what there was. So you can imagine in Aquinas's day, trying to write an account of everything that the Christian world knew, of all of sciences. That's, say, 1277 he died. Jump ahead to 1888. That was the publication of the 9th edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica. Now, you think I carry this crap in my head? No, I don't. This is Alistair McIntyre's 3 Rival Versions of Moral Inquiry, Gifford lecture. He makes this point, okay? The 9th edition, and can you imagine reading the various editions of the Encyclopedia Britannica and commenting on their history and all that stuff? You can imagine it. If you need help imagining it, by the way, watch the movie, The Madman and what's the movie about the Oxford English Dictionary? Have you seen that movie? Mm-hmm. Drop everything and see it. It is absolutely worthwhile. Who's in it? The easy guy is Mel Gibson. The other guy's easy too. He's just as famous, but his name's escaping me. His face is there, but his name is not pumping in. But 2 pretty well-known actors, one of whom is in an insane asylum, and the other is literally an Oxford Don. And all they're trying to do is get all the words in English, all of them, their histories, all the meanings, everything. All they're trying to do is do that. And this was around that time. The OED was around the time of the Encyclopedia Britannica. I don't remember, it may be a decade or more off, but it's not, it's the same quarter century, I think. And it's an Herculean effort to try to do that. In 1888, the 9th Encyclopedia tried to do that with basically all of knowledge, all of human knowledge. That's what encyclopedias were thought to be, not just a reference text with something under all the important words, but everything under all the important words. Something like that, a whole coherent account of what the world knows. That No one tries that anymore. McIntyre's point in 3 rival versions. Nobody's doing that anymore.
Wikipedia might be an attempt. But
Wikipedia is an attempt in a certain way. You're right. It's a delightful attempt. And it's the whole world's project. And it's interesting. It doesn't have, you don't have the, it's an attempt. That's right. We should come back to that. Let's do a whole night on Wikipedia sometime. That'd be fun. Because what on earth is that project? And is it painting in gray? Or is it painting in different colors? Does it even recognize different colors? Should we recognize different colors? Should there be an article for a different community on different subjects? Is there a different Wikipedia, so to speak, for different communities? Should there be some overlap? What's the basis for the overlap, right? All those questions are really good questions. Okay. So information overload, volume, the information overload, the overload suggests that we have a capacity that we tap out. It's too much for us. You could also just look at the size of the information, just the mere amount of data that's available. Maybe if you've seen data quantified, you've seen some of those big data. Back 10 years ago, when big data was a big deal and high performance computing stood out as a separate topic, in that world, they used to quantify data all the time. Like, holy smoke, we got this huge data deluge coming and we barely have the computational resources to keep up with it, et cetera. That was a big topic. And big data was sort of a big thing. Now, all data is big. I mean, it's like, it's talking about, now it's like talking about, I don't know what, big pools of water in the ocean or something like that. I mean, it's just water everywhere now. It's data everywhere. So how to navigate that is something of a problem. It's a challenge at any rate. And I'm suggesting here that there is a rich idea of information. And I've said again in a bumper sticker what I mean by that rich idea of information. It's to be information is to inform. To be information is to inform. And I'm suggesting that there's a person, there's an entity, there's a consciousness, there's knowing what it's like to know that. Something like that. Or if you don't know it, maybe not all information. I mean, is there a difference between seeming and knowing? Is there a difference between perceiving and misperceiving? Right? Those sorts of questions, you have to make room for all those sorts of questions. But somehow, is there a thing as to what it is like to be a person who grasps this or grasps that? I'm suggesting that question, starting with that sense of information is not fundamentally on a printed page. Information is fundamentally in a person's mind. That starting point and what else leads to the idea of something that looks like, when you state it, it looks like it's a solution. First of all, there's community processing. You're not in it by yourself. You're in it with other persons, and you're in it with those persons across time. So you have an information processing capability that isn't just about your 40, 50, 60, 70 years of real thought as an individual. There's a much larger pool. And of course, some of this is utterly uncontroversial. Of course, we process things. And we have a scientific community, for example, right? And we process the world through it. There's not lone astronomers, right, working on the nature of the cosmos. There's teams. right? And those teams are sewn together, and there's a really quite a structure, right? And lots of parallel processing going on there. And by the way, one of the few places, sorry, it's one of the many places where on very few subjects, you hear people say, this is what we think. Scientists talk that way all the time. Graduate students learn to take on the scientific we. This is what we know. This is what we think. And they're speaking as members of a community that kind of has a threshold of discovery. People know sort of where that threshold is and what's behind it. And the things behind it are not completely, it's not that they're settled. It's not that they're unquestionable, but they are what the community right now holds in common. And they're the best answers so far. There's maybe some dispute at some of these levels, but in general, the community grows up and agrees about a great deal and disputes about different. I don't want to say any less. There's plenty of disputes. It's always more, and it's further on in the discovery phase. But people do think there. So community processing is possible. In science, it's possible in areas where those areas already outstrip people's ability to get on top of them. So we have survey, we have review articles. And review articles are a form, we've mentioned this before, but just very briefly. A review article is a genre. You probably have to write one when you're getting your PhD in science, and it probably becomes your first chapter in your dissertation, a review article. But that review article has real value. It gets published in a journal because all the stuff is scattered all over the place. Someone has to read all that stuff over some topic that you can wrap your mind around. It's not too big, right? It's already incredibly specialized if it has a review article about it. But inside that space that the review article is talking about, you read basically everything that there is. And you identify all the various themes and all the major players in that space. That's how science proceeds. Wouldn't that be helpful if we had people writing review articles for us about the world, right? Here's what to think about prisons, right? That's over here. To take something we talked about before. We don't have people writing review articles about life, right? But we do in life have people writing review articles. That's community processing. Now imagine it were AI assisted. Imagine that the pattern, imagine first, and here it's not so hard, and no doubt it already happens. The rule of the internet and technology is like a genie. You just rub it, you ask for it, it comes out, it's already there. If you can think of it, you're almost never the first person to think of it. So if you can formulate a coherent thought about technology, it's already the case. You are almost never the first person to think that way, or to see that would be a good thing, or to put it into practice. In that regard, the internet really is like a genie. So we could look right now and we could find machine learning assisted review articles. Guaranteed. That's a thing. I mean, we already steal elections with machine learning. That was a thing a long time ago. Cambridge Analytica came out and everybody knew that was a thing. It could have been invented by 100 different people. 1,000 different people could have invented that, right? So somebody does. So AI-assisted community processing is already a thing, but even though I'm only promising it to you right now, it's already a thing. Why couldn't that AI boost, enrich? What if there was a pattern of the way mature members of a community think, and that pattern could be, what if you could train machine learning in that pattern? And what if the output, what if instead of, do you know this, shoot, this would be much better if this was right at the tip of my tongue. What is the natural language processing OpenAI is the organization, the nonprofit organization, flirting, by the way, with whether they should go for profit or not, because it's hard to get it's hard to get the amount of compute power you need unless you can pay for it, right? So Google has a ton of compute power, and Amazon does, and Facebook does. OpenAI has a lot less, right? But OpenAI is anyway in this space, and other places are in this space too. And they've got a natural language processing algorithm. Do you remember it made news when the first one came out? They delayed putting it out because they thought it had such power that they thought it could be used for disinformation, etc. It's basically think of a bot that can write good English about anything. Ask it to write you a one-page paragraph. Ask it to write you a white paper. I'd like 1,000 words, please, on this topic. And out it comes. And it gets trained on, if I got this right, it gets trained on the whole internet. And it has got, I think, the number of, they compare it to the human brain, which has got multiple trillions of synapses. And this thing, I think, is at the 10% of the human brain level right now, in terms of the data set that this thing has been trained on. It's enormously powerful. And it turns out it can speak a lot of really good English sentences. That's already a thing. Now imagine it weren't just a thing for some generic research project. Imagine your community had such a thing. Your community, imagine Alexa sitting in on your team meetings. Alexa's taking it all in, right? Alexa's recording everything. And Alexa's figuring out what the officers in this company have got to say. What are the types of solutions that these guys crank out? And there's a whole bank back there that Watson now, just to jump to a corporate context, right? Watson, this AI that IBM has put together, is basically dropping in solutions. It's dropping in white paper solutions. It knows what passes. It doesn't know it perfectly. It makes a lot of mistakes that ordinary people don't make, but it makes an enormous amount of progress for you. That would be, imagine your company had that. When I say imagine your company had that, I mean, let's look it up. Your company already has it. So if I can articulate it at my level of grasp, it already exists. In fact, there are startup companies that already have patents in this space. Guaranteed that's true when we're at this level of talking. And I'd love to be proven wrong. I once put together a little bot for this, actually, where you could enter data. You could go look, what is it you would like the internet to do for you? Anything, you name it. Go find out if it'll do that for you and record here. This is what I wanted it to do. This is what I found when I went and looked for 10 minutes, right? And in fact, not a lot of people entered. I don't have a lot of data from that bot. That little, it's basically a little Google form that was sent out to people when they came and saw certain things, but that's doable. And I'm certain that it's the case. And I'm certain it's at this patent case that at the level I just discussed, I'm certain it's the case there too. But I haven't tested it like I did the ask ordinary people what you want the internet to do for you. Anything you wish technology could do for you, find out if it exists. You're never the first person to wish that. Of course it can exist for sure. This is true at this level too. All right. That's a solution, just a sketch. It points to a solution. It makes sense if there are answers. If you start making distinctions between mature members of a community, hold a community together. Here I'm peeling back into this. Oop, what happened? Sorry about that. Let me just jump out of this for a moment and go back here. that set of resources, imagine it were for a moment, imagine you needed the whole high information flow network of rich communities set of resources. Imagine you needed that whole lens, okay, in order to solve this problem. I'm suggesting that there are solutions for this information overflow problem in this network. Now, maybe it's only a subset of this network. Maybe it's only a few propositions inside here, right? That would be the hard work of finding the minimum sets. What is exactly doing the work for you here? Where are the breakthroughs? Why is there real insight? Why is there real promise? What are those pieces? Where's the power exactly? If you were going to if you were a structural engineer, you'd pay attention to exactly where the forces are distributed. And that's the sort of thing that we're looking to do here, is to map the rhetorical force. What is it that persuades people to look at things a certain way? What are the actual pieces? What do they actually do for you? What's the model that emerges? How much does it have to explain? What are the pieces that have to be in the model until all of a sudden people find it interesting? And they say, hey, wait a minute, that looks like a solution, right? That we could make a study of. So all you've heard today, and maybe we should turn to Rachel for a few minutes. All you've heard today is just a wish and a prayer that we could form triplets like this, that we could probably map them in some sort of way in a mind map. We may need more than just a word or two. We may actually need a concept. This will be worth exploring. What's the unit here? It may be a coherent thought is a unit, right? So there may be, for one example only, then I'll jump to Rachel. The idea of information being that at the core of information is the notion of an experiencer who is informed. To be information is to inform. It may only be potentially to inform. There may be some, there may be some derivative to it. But the key thing, it's information if and only if someone takes it in and weaves it into the structure. Something like that. That's a whole sentence. And it's not just a bump, it's not just a phrase. It'd be hard to put in a bubble maybe. So we may have, this is why we have to write out the resource and then maybe put a resource identifier on it. And then you could start to see a structure of the relationship between these things in a mind map, but you probably wouldn't want a lot of verbiage in there. You'd probably want a little reference. Okay, that's what I've been thinking about. That's a project I think needs to happen next. It needs to happen next. It can happen next if we're going to advance this 3-lens matrix proposition here.
Yeah, so Uncle Tom, as you were talking, I was just kind of taking down some of the stuff you were saying in the word map. And actually, I'm going to jump on a second screen just so I can share my screen, just so you guys can see what I have for the moment. Hold on.
This meeting is being recorded.
Are you getting?
Yeah, you better click off one of your mics, Rach.
All right, even
I'm sure you got it. But I'll tell you, I had mind map open. And so I'm looking at it live, and that's what we did last time. Maybe we should do that rather than as a screen share.
Am I still giving you feedback?
No feedback, but that's because there's only one of you.
Yeah, I thought so. Okay, yeah, sweet. If you have it open, that works too. So I don't have a ton here, but basically what I was trying to do is just
in the blue bubbles, I have like things that seem to be main ideas that would be worth expanding out upon. Some of those I did a little bit of work expanding out upon on either things that you had said, things that occurred to me as I was looking at that. But I mean, there's not a ton here. It's pretty self-explanatory. I think the ideas that you were talking about at the end kind of build on the whole, like, I didn't work at all to put out what makes a solution viable and whatnot. And also your idea of like what actually makes information. I think those two key terms that you're talking about at the end, I didn't go into fleshing those out yet because like you were mentioning, I do think that it's my first instinct was to go like narrative. And I think that's kind of challenging for a mind map, and structuring it a different way could make sense. But this is just kind of what I threw out in there. If anybody else has any other thoughts of things that might make sense to be root nodes that should exist in blue, happy to add those in because I do still have it up. But yeah, that's how I that's how my brain was tracking what you
Yeah.
were saying.
Well, this is really helpful. It's a great proof of concept, right? We wouldn't expect it to be finished. We could put some time into it, probably offline. It'd be nice to just sort of sit and think about it. I did that when we were done our last mind map, by the way, and I wrote some stuff out in the rights area. And I just needed
saw
to be
that.
quiet and think about it, right? And try to build it out. And I think there's plenty of room. There's also room for just what you've just done, in effect, taking notes in a mind map space, I think is very useful. It's a good illustration that one could do this.
I do too. I think I might start doing this more often when we talk, because like this works for my brain in a way that a transcript doesn't as much.
Mhm.
Or like, I mean, listening to it back feels like the best way to like rehash an argument, but like the time associated with that is like, I think I'm going to do this more.
Cool. Yeah. So my mind's just fixated on the possibility of doing this sort of thing. I don't know what the promise will be of these sort of triplets that I talked about. I think it's an interesting idea. Problem solution is a pretty basic paradigm, and what is it that enables you to solve a problem and makes reference to something else. That's we wouldn't want to be lockstep. This is not a theory of everything reduces to triplets of that sort or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's not a bad way to start asking the question. And if you did that, you'd have a bunch of these. That's my point. And how would these things, what would it look like for these things to actually be laced together? It would be hard to have an endlessly long, I mean, if you took you'd look like one of these reporters who's chasing the criminals with yarn stretched across newspaper articles on the side of the garage wall, right? We've all seen, that's almost a cliche, used in car buying commercials and all kinds of different things. That visualization challenge, or that visualization solution for some visualization challenges is, it's a cliche for a reason. People are searching for visualization tools to pull together complex sets of ideas. A mind map is one, but you'd need what, a three-dimensional mind map? You'd need to be able to scroll through it in X, Y, and Z dimensions. That shouldn't be that hard, actually, right? In fact, according to me, it should already exist. Right. So I'm going to test that theory. I'll do a little bit of research. Three-dimensional.
It makes me think of like a mobile.
Mind map diamond.
Are you making up a name, or are you just
$200 a year.
Is that actually true?
No, I don't know.
Oh, I see.
No,
No.
don't we have Mind Map Gold though?
Yeah, you're right. We do.
Yeah.
That's for multiple users. Yeah, they seem to think it's easier to scale the use of this product than it is to deepen it. I haven't seen a lot of resources for deepening it. It's the basic product. But it'd be very nice. How hard would it be to put a little axis of rotation on this whole visualization? Right? I'm trying to think of where I've seen that. I've seen it too many times to mention, really. I mean, it's not that hard to do.
All right, let's test your theory about if you can think of something you want, the internet has done it already.
Yeah, right. So I'm testing right now. For me, 3D mind map. 3D mind map. Here it is. Is it? Or is it just someone trying to? Well, yeah.
That second picture
map.
looks pretty
Mind mapping 3D helps you build and visualize your thoughts, ideas, and notes in a fun and engaging way. Make incredible 3D mind maps with links to any references and resources you need online, like websites, social profiles, videos, and file attachments. Mind mapping 3D makes thinking more visual and fun. Exactly. So yeah,
Board space.
I actually hadn't looked that up, but yeah, it exists. So 3D mind map, and then it's very helpful to jump to images sometimes rather than reading the text. And let's see what
Fair.
kind of visualizations they put together. And oh, very interesting. Oh yeah. I feel like I've been here. Stanford did a dictionary like this. Did you ever see it? It's called, Stanford did a dictionary. It was pretty cutting edge. And I'll think of the name of it. It begins with a GR. Like grouper, but that's not it. That's a fish. But it's something like that. And it is, you've seen it in social network analysis, or maybe only I have, because I'm weird that way. But you look at, you sort of drag around your friends. Have you seen that kind of thing? Where you can sort of work through a 3D map of all your networks, your friends? A lot of free social network analysis software. My favorite is right here at the bottom. I think it's called Gesper. Gee, why can't I remember the name? No, that's something else. I got it right here. Come on, where the heck is it? Yeah, there it is. Hold on, I had to actually launch it to read it. Gelfi, maybe. Gephi, Gephi. You could look that up. You could use it. It's an example. You could drop in. It'll help you organize your stuff and drop it in, and now you got an interactive 3D sort of environment, and all for free. This is the tool. The guy who wrote this is the guy who LinkedIn hired to do their version of it. I told you sometime I was going to show you that thing. I'm not going to make it a little bit. I'm going to do it right now. It's going to take 10 seconds. I'm jumping to LinkedIn. I'm going to do a share. Stealing back from you, Rach. Going in my profile, because I dropped it. I dropped a cool picture of it here. It's the only place I know for sure where it is. Come on, profile, my network. No, it's over in me. I forget where it is. View profile. Okay, sorry, not 10 seconds, 30. Look at the graphic behind my head. If you all can see my screen, right? It's suggesting that they're in this world, right? I just want to find. Come on, you make a liar out of me. I've got it here under one of these things that I used to do. There must be a view more thing. Yeah, see more. Here it is. Let's see more for Bosco. That's not what I want. See more for Focus, University of Notre Dame. 5 more experiences. That's why I couldn't see it. It's down here. Here it is. So I taught at Trinity School, and those are LinkedIn for a while would let you do 500 contacts at once in their LinkedIn labs. And it was the guy who did Gephi's software. They bought that guy basically, and he brought his technology to LinkedIn. And it would automatically generate these things for you. And what it generated them, and then you had to go in and color map them. Here, I'll make this larger. So this is the Trinity School at Greenlawn People of Praise bundle. And if you want to see how tightly connected people are in the world, right, you can actually see at least their LinkedIn connections. And it turns out this is an incredibly tightly connected group of people. Generally, other people are a little bit less connected than that. Up here is my, what it is green, this is my Bosco, Uganda group of people, right? And in orange here. So anyway, this kind of visualization, and in Gephi, it's 3-dimensional, and you can drag this around and you can see it all. Imagine your mind map like this. It's not that hard to imagine. It should exist. And now back to this screen. Apparently people are working on it, right? I mean, look at all the funky kind of mind maps that show up here. So we have to find one. And I suppose the rule of thumb is take the first one that Google gives you that doesn't have the word ad on it. And it's likeliest to be the one you're looking for. That's how the algorithm is supposed to work anyway. Okay, so this is another time we should quit for tonight, but this was a good start of what it would be like to take, why we should have such a thing and what it would be like to build it out. It wouldn't take forever. Jumping back here, I made a pretty good list of problems, and it's not, come on, move. Where is it? Green lens matrix. It's not indefinitely deep, and I think I took a shot at 2 lenses, and I think I have 17 for the first, and I don't even know if these are the right lenses anymore. But this was, one day running through these lenses. CR is conscious realism. When you add conscious realism in a more explicit sort of way, that brings you into all kinds of other kinds of problems. And you don't need to be a conscious realist in order to think in terms of a high information flow network of rich communities. Isn't that pretty obvious? You might even sort of bring that first level of information in. You might take that information account, bring it in, but you don't necessarily ask the question yet, whether it follows from there is suggested by that all there is consciousness, right? That's a really wild additional step. And don't take that step, right? In fact, you might even think, it sounds crazy to even think that until you spend some time with this first lens on. Until you think about what truth is, by the way, right? And what it is, what is it to be right about something? And then what's it like for something, what would it mean for something to be real, but you're wrong about it? And in fact, everybody's wrong about it. What would that be like, right? And now we're heading into the sort of stuff that Donald Hoffman rehearses, right? Takes us in that direction. And under that, I'm only up to 37 problems. I wanted to get to 99 if you know the song. There is such a song. I got 90 problems. Do you know it? Anyway, I recommend you look it up if you don't know it. It's not a very polite song. But heck, you get a song that's as close to what you're doing.
This is a Jay-Z reference, Uncle Tom.
Yeah.
Okay. So this won't take forever. And today was just a look at it. So I'm done talking. It's 9:01.
Cool.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
Sweet. Thank you for running us through that.
Yeah, you bet. Maybe I'll return to it. It'd be nice if I actually had some work done on this further. There's still stuff to mine here, but I'm also trying to advance it. And I'd like to advance this so that if we return to it on Monday, we're actually ready to take some real next steps. But I did just outline maybe a couple examples of these, maybe a piece of software that sews those examples together. That would be a pretty cool thing. That would give some idea. What I'm trying to do here is give some idea where the project would need to go. Okay.
Gotcha.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep.
All right. It's been fun.
Yep.
See you guys. Have a good
Bye, guys.
weekend.
You
Yeah.
too.
Thanks all. See you, JP.
See you, Uncle Tom.